My name is Renata Solberg. I'm 34 years old, and I want to tell you about the day a judge read my dead husband's private journal out loud in a courtroom, while his parents sat 10 feet away from me, and finally, for the first time in 9 months of legal warfare, could not say a single word. I want to tell you what it felt like to hear Daniel's handwriting turned into sound. His voice, essentially, because if you knew him, you knew he wrote exactly the way he talked. Precise, careful, honest in a way that sometimes made you flinch a little, because you weren't used to people just saying the true thing without dressing it up first. I want to tell you what his mother's face looked like when the judge read the part about her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's the end. And to understand the end, you need to understand what the 14 months before it actually looked like from the inside. Because from the outside, I've been told I looked fine. Composed. Handling it remarkably well. For a widow with 2 small children and a mortgage and a full-time job and a legal battle she never asked for. From the inside, I was reorganizing the same kitchen cabinet for the 4th time at 11 o'clock at night because it was the only thing I could control. Before I go any further, if you just found this channel, hit subscribe. I post stories like this one, and this is one of the ones I've needed to tell for a long time. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always check. It helps me feel less like I'm talking into the void. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Daniel died on a Thursday morning in January. He was 36. He was getting ready for work. He had already showered, already made coffee, already put on one of his gray dress shirts, and then he was on the kitchen floor. The paramedics were there in 8 minutes. 8 minutes is a long time when you are on the floor next to someone doing compressions and counting and talking to them, even though some part of you already knows. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a genetic condition that had been sitting in his heart his entire life without announcing itself. The cardiologist used the word silent, and I remember thinking that was the wrong word. There was nothing silent about it. Marin was 6, Theo was 4. They were both still asleep upstairs when it happened. I don't know how I got them to my mother's house that morning. I don't remember driving. I remember sitting in her kitchen afterwards, watching her make tea I didn't ask for, and thinking, I have to figure out what we do now. That's who I am. I know that's not everyone. Some people fall apart and build themselves back. I went straight to figuring out what we do now. I don't think it's strength. I think it's the thing that happens when you grow up in a house where someone has to hold things together, and it turns out that person is you. I grew up in West Duluth, Minnesota. My dad worked the docks until I was 11, and then he didn't. And after that, things got quieter and smaller, in the way that happens when a man loses the thing he built his identity around. My mom picked up the difference. She worked hospital laundry, double shifts, came home smelling like industrial bleach, and never once complained about it in front of me and my brother Cole. I learned from her that love looks like showing up, that it doesn't have to say anything, it just has to be there. What I didn't learn, what nobody taught me, was how to let someone else show up for me. Daniel's parents, Gerald and Vivian Solberg, did not approve of me from the beginning. I want to be careful about how I say that, because it wasn't dramatic. They weren't cruel. They were precise about it. The kind of disapproval that wears good manners. Vivian would say things like, Renata, you're so capable, in a tone that meant she found my capability slightly inconvenient. Gerald would ask about my work in the specific way that people ask about your work when they consider it quaint. They were always perfectly pleasant. They just made it quietly clear that Daniel had married below what they'd imagined for him. And Daniel, he saw it. He said so, more than once. My parents have a very specific picture of what a Solberg family looks like, and you ruined it, and I'm so glad you ruined it. He made me laugh when he said that. He had a gift for taking the things that hurt and turning them 45 degrees until they looked different. I think about that a lot now. We had 7 years. 7 years of a real marriage, which means beautiful and hard, and sometimes we didn't handle things well, and sometimes we did. He traveled too much for work. I took on too many cases at the office. We argued about money and about his parents and about how to handle Marin's school situation and about who remembered to call the plumber. Normal, real, human things. We were in the middle of a life, which means we hadn't finished it. That's the part nobody tells you about grief. You're not mourning something completed. You're mourning the interruption. The first time I understood how badly Gerald and Vivian wanted to rewrite what that interruption meant, really understood it, in my body, was at Daniel's memorial service. Vivian stood up and spoke for 12 minutes. She talked about Daniel's childhood, his career, the Solberg family legacy. She talked about his parents' home and the holidays there, and the summers on the lake. She talked about Marin and Theo as Daniel's children, not our children, his children, and what the Solberg family intended to give them. She said my name once, in passing. I sat in the front row of that church and listened and kept my face completely still. And afterward, Cole found me by the coat rack and put his hand on the back of my neck the way he used to when we were kids. And he said very quietly, "You heard it too." "Yeah," I said. "Okay," he said. "I just wanted to make sure you knew I heard it." That was it. He didn't try to fix it or minimize it. He just made sure I wasn't alone in the room where I'd heard it. If you've ever been in a moment like that, where something deeply wrong just happened, and everyone around you either didn't notice or decided not to, you know what it costs to hold your face still. You know what it means to have even one person turn to you and say, "I saw that too." It costs something to be unseen in a room full of people who claim to love you. And if that's already resonating, if this story is already reaching something in you, please hit the like button, subscribe so you don't miss how this ends, and share this with someone who's ever been the person the room looked through. Because what I went through next, it gets harder before it gets clearer. 11 days after Daniel's funeral, Vivian hired a private investigator. I didn't know that then. I found out 9 months later, through the legal discovery process, when Marcus, my attorney, got their records subpoenaed. 11 days. Daniel had been in the ground for 11 days, and she was already building a file on me. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. For the first several months, they were present the way grief makes people present. They came to see the children. They called. Vivian sent meals, which I ate, because I was not going to be too proud to feed my kids. Gerald asked about the finances, which I answered honestly, because I didn't know yet that honesty was being collected. I thought we were family in the way you remain family after a loss. Imperfectly, uncomfortably, but real. The envelope came on a Tuesday in March. I found it on the front porch when I got home from picking up Theo from his speech therapy appointment. He was asleep in his car seat, which he almost never did at that hour. So I carried him in first, got him onto the couch, went back out for the diaper bag and the mail and that envelope. I stood at the kitchen counter and opened it without sitting down. I read it standing, very still, for almost 2 full minutes. Then I picked up my phone and called Cole. "They filed," I said. A pause. "For what?" "Custody. Full custody of Marin and Theo." My name is Renata Solberg. I am 34 years old. And that was the moment the fight actually began. The petition was 11 pages long. I know because I counted them. I don't know why I counted them. Some part of my brain needed a number to hold on to while the rest of it processed what I was reading. 11 pages explaining, in careful legal language, why Gerald and Vivian Solberg believed they would be better custodians of my children than I was. They didn't accuse me of anything criminal. I want to be clear about that, because when people hear custody battle, they sometimes assume the worst. Abuse, neglect, something obvious. This wasn't that. This was more sophisticated and, in some ways, harder to fight. They were arguing that I was insufficient, that I was financially precarious, that I was emotionally unavailable due to unresolved and complicated grief, that my work hours were excessive, that the Solberg family could provide Marin and Theo with educational opportunities and financial stability that I, on my own, could not. Every sentence was technically defensible. Every sentence was also a weapon. Marcus Thibault had been recommended to me by a colleague at work who'd gone through a difficult divorce 2 years earlier. I called him the morning after the envelope arrived, sat across from his desk in his small office on Hennepin Avenue, and watched him read the petition in complete silence for 6 minutes. Then he set it down and looked at me. "They have money and a credible surface argument," he said. "Those two things together are genuinely dangerous in family court. I want you to understand that going in." "I understand it," I said. "Good. Because the way we fight this is by making the surface argument collapse under scrutiny. That means we go through everything: your finances, your schedule, your support network, your relationship with Daniel, the children's well-being as documented by their school and their pediatrician. Everything that proves that what looks like precariousness from the outside is actually a functioning, stable life." "And if it's not enough?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then we find what else we have. There's always something else." I didn't know yet what that something else was. I wouldn't know for another 6 months. The first mediation session was mandatory, required by the court before any custody case could proceed to trial. We sat across a conference table in a downtown office building, Gerald and Vivian on one side with their attorney, me and Marcus on the other. Vivian wore a dove gray dress. She looked like someone's idea of a grandmother, warm and soft-edged and quietly devastated by circumstances beyond her control. She called me sweetheart when she sat down. She said she only wanted what was best for all of them. She reached across the table and touched my hand briefly, and her eyes were full and sincere. I didn't pull my hand away. I sat there and let her hold it for a moment and said, "I know this is hard for all of us, Vivian." In the parking lot afterward, Marcus asked me how I was doing. "She touched my hand," I said, "and I felt like I was being measured." He nodded slowly. "That's because you were." That's when I started to understand what we were actually dealing with. This wasn't grief expressing itself badly. This was a campaign, and it had been running since 11 days after Daniel's funeral. Over the next several months, their legal team filed 3 supplemental petitions. The first cited the private investigator's report, which documented, I'm not making this up, 2 occasions when I left Marin and Theo overnight with my mother during a work emergency. 2 nights. With their grandmother, who lives 40 minutes away and has been a constant presence in their lives since before they were born. The petition framed this as evidence of emotional unavailability. I read that one at the kitchen table and had to stand up and reorganize the spice cabinet before I could respond to Marcus's email about it. The second petition included a financial analysis. It projected, based on my income and current legal expenditures, that my savings would be depleted within approximately 2 years. The number they used was accurate. That was the part that made it hard to breathe. Not that they'd found it, but that it was true. I was spending money I didn't have on a fight I hadn't started, and they knew the math better than I did. But it was the third petition that nearly broke me. Have you ever had someone take something true, something real, something that happened, and arrange it in a frame so distorted that you barely recognize it? That's what the third petition did. It included a signed declaration from a man named Pollard, a colleague of Daniel's, claiming that in the last year of his life, Daniel had expressed private concern about my emotional withdrawal and its effect on the children. I sat with that for a long time, not because I believed it, but because I knew how it would read. A dead man's coworker, sworn testimony, the specific language of concern. It was designed to plant a question in the judge's mind that couldn't easily be unplanted. I called Marcus at 9 on a Wednesday night. The kids were asleep. I was sitting on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet I'd reorganized 4 times. "Who is Pollard?" I said. "He worked with Daniel for 4 years, corporate side. Daniel barely mentioned him. I met him twice, at company events. He signed a legal declaration saying Daniel confided in him regularly. Daniel didn't confide in people. He confided in me. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then we need to prove that. And the best way to do that? He paused. Renata, you mentioned a journal. I closed my eyes. I know, he said before I could answer. But I think it's time. I had found the journal 3 months after Daniel died. I was going through his desk, not because I wanted to, but because the mortgage company needed documents and I'd run out of places to look. And it was in the bottom drawer, underneath a folder of old tax returns. A medium-sized leather notebook, dark brown, the cover worn soft at the corners. His name wasn't on it. Nothing was on it. I opened it to the first page and saw his handwriting and closed it immediately. I wasn't ready. I put it back in the drawer and closed the drawer and went and sat on the edge of our bed, his side, which I never sat on, for about 10 minutes. Then I got up and made dinner. That was 3 months before Marcus called me. In the time between finding it and that phone call, I had opened the drawer 7 times. I had touched the cover twice. I had not read a single word past the first page. I'm not ready, I told Marcus. I know, he said, but the case might not wait for ready. Cole came over without being asked. That's the thing about him. He reads my texts the way some people read weather. When they go short and factual, he shows up. I didn't ask him to come. He just arrived at my door at 9:30 with his canvas jacket and his stupid pen behind his ear, and he said, "Where is it?" I got it from the drawer. We sat at the kitchen table, 2 glasses of water, the journal between us like something that needed to be handled carefully. I picked it up, set it down, picked it up again, and then I opened it. What I expected, I think what I was afraid of, was evidence of distance. Proof that the silence I'd sometimes felt in the last year of our marriage was real and documented, and not just my imagination. I was afraid of reading my own failures in his handwriting. That is not what I found. What I found was 5 years of a marriage, written in Daniel's precise, unhurried hand. He wrote in it irregularly, sometimes 3 entries in a week, sometimes nothing for 2 months. But what he wrote was specific in the way that only honesty is specific. Not grand, not performed, just true. He wrote about the night Marin had croup at age 3, and I sat in the bathroom with her for 2 hours with the shower running hot, and how he watched from the doorway and thought, she knows exactly what to do, and she's terrified, and she's not showing it because Marin needs calm right now. He wrote about Theo's speech therapy referral, how I'd noticed the delay 6 months before the pediatrician flagged it, how I'd done the research, made the calls, navigated the wait lists. He wrote about school conferences he'd missed because of work travel, and how he'd come home to detailed notes I'd left on his pillow so he'd know what he'd missed. He was watching. He was always watching. And he was writing it down. I want you to sit with that for a second. The idea that someone who loved you was quietly keeping a record of who you actually were, while other people were building a different record entirely. That while Vivian was compiling a file with a private investigator, Daniel was filling a notebook with the truth. Drop a comment right now and tell me, have you ever found out that someone saw you, really saw you, only after it was too late to thank them? Because I think a lot of people watching this know exactly what I mean. I read every comment, every single one. I read for 2 hours. Cole read beside me, his shoulder against mine, not saying anything. When I got to an entry from 2 years before Daniel died, I stopped. I read it twice. Then I pushed the journal across the table to Cole without saying anything, and I watched him read it. I don't know why I keep feeling like I should write this down. Maybe because nothing I've said to my father has ever stuck without a record. If something happens to me, Renata needs to be able to prove what she is. Because my parents will not tell the truth about her if telling the truth costs them what they want. Cole looked up from the page. His eyes were red at the edges. He knew, he said. He knew, I said. We sat there in the kitchen at midnight, and the house was quiet, and outside it was still Minnesota winter, and somewhere in the drawer of Daniel's desk there had been, this whole time, a man who had loved me carefully enough to anticipate exactly this moment and leave something behind for it. I didn't cry right then. I held it the way you hold something too large to process immediately. But I felt something shift, some tectonic thing in my chest, moving slowly toward a place it hadn't been before. Cole reached across the table and put his hand over mine. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I brought the journal to Marcus the next morning. I drove to his office before my workday started, the journal in my leather tote bag, and I sat across from his desk and watched him read the relevant entries in silence. He has a very still quality when he's concentrating. No fidgeting, no expression changes, just complete absorption. I've seen it in courtrooms since. It's the same face. He read for a long time. When he finally set the journal down, he took off his reading glasses and held them in both hands and looked at me. "This is admissible," he said, "under the right conditions. It's a contemporaneous written record, consistently dated, verifiable through handwriting analysis. The entries speak directly to Daniel's observed assessment of you as a parent over a period of years." He paused. "And the entry about his father." "I know," I said. "That entry is going to matter, Renata." "I know." He leaned back. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clearly. They're going to fight this. The moment we move to introduce the journal, their team will file objections, self-serving, insufficiently authenticated, cherry-picked from private correspondence. The judge will have to rule on admissibility before a single word gets read in court. This is not guaranteed." "But you think it can get in?" "I think if we build the authentication properly and argue the right evidentiary framework, yes. Judge Wren has been on the family court bench for 19 years. She is not easily impressed by performance, and she is not easily moved by money. She cares about the record." He looked at me. "And Daniel gave us a record." I nodded. I pressed my hands flat on my knees under the table because they had started to shake slightly, and I did not want Marcus to see that. "Okay," I said. "Let's build it." What followed was 3 months of preparation that looked, from the outside, like nothing. I went to work. I picked up my kids. I made dinner, signed permission slips, attended Marin's school concert, where she played a recorder solo with complete seriousness and slightly wrong fingering. I reorganized the pantry. I called my mom. I had Cole over for dinner on Thursdays because Thursdays had become the night I most needed another person in the house. But underneath all of that, Marcus and I were building. We got Daniel's handwriting authenticated by a forensic documents examiner. We assembled a chronological record of my parenting: school attendance, medical appointments, teacher communications, therapy session logs for Theo, every documented interaction that proved a present and engaged mother. We gathered declarations from Marin's teacher, from Theo's speech therapist, from my supervisor at work, from 3 families I'd helped navigate housing crises who were willing to speak to my professional and personal character. And Marcus dug into Pollard, the colleague who had signed a declaration claiming Daniel confided his concerns to him regularly. What Marcus found, through careful cross-referencing of Daniel's work calendar, his email records from the company server, and the dates Pollard claimed these conversations occurred, was that on 4 of the 6 specific dates Pollard cited, Daniel had been in different cities entirely: Denver, Atlanta, Seattle, Chicago. The conversations Pollard described could not have happened when and where he said they did. When Marcus called to tell me this, I was in my car in the parking lot of Theo's school, waiting for pickup. "He fabricated it?" I said. "He fabricated significant portions of it. The question is whether he did it on his own, or whether someone helped him remember things incorrectly." I already knew the answer. I didn't say it out loud. "Can we use it?" "We can absolutely use it," Marcus said. "And we will." The night before the trial began, Cole came over. He brought food from the Thai place on Superior Street that we've been going to since we were in our 20s, and we sat at the kitchen table after the kids were in bed and ate pad see ew out of the containers and didn't talk about the trial for almost an hour. We talked about Marin's recorder solo. We talked about a difficult student Cole was trying to figure out how to reach. We talked about our mother, who had offered to come stay during the trial week, and whom I'd told to please wait until after. At some point, Cole said, "How are you actually doing?" "I don't know yet," I said. "I think I'm in the part that comes before knowing." He nodded like that made complete sense. "You're going to be okay." "I know." "I mean it." "I know you mean it, Cole." He looked at me for a moment. "He was right about you, you know. Everything he wrote. He was just right." I pressed my lips together and looked at my food. "Yeah," I said after a moment. "He was pretty good at that." I drove to the courthouse the next morning on streets I've driven my whole adult life in this city. I passed the coffee shop where Daniel and I had our first real conversation, which turned out to last 4 hours and end with both of us missing the thing we'd each separately planned to do that evening. I passed the hospital where Marin was born, and then Theo, 21 months apart. I passed the park where Daniel used to take Marin on Saturday mornings when she was 2, so I could sleep in. Because he knew I never asked for it, and he did it anyway. I was wearing my navy blazer, my old block heels, my wedding ring. I had the journal in my tote bag. The trial was 4 days. I'm not going to walk you through all of it because some of it was procedural and tedious in the way that legal proceedings are always partly procedural and tedious, and I don't want to waste your time. What I want to tell you about are the moments that mattered. Gerald testified on day 2. He was exactly what you would expect: measured, credible, the kind of man who has testified in legal settings before and knows how to occupy a room. He spoke about Daniel's childhood with genuine emotion. He talked about what the Solberg name meant, what it carried, what it could provide. He did not attack me directly. He simply described a life he believed my children deserved, and let the comparison speak for itself. He was good. I sat at the respondents' table and watched him and thought, he actually believes this. He has constructed a version of events in which he is the responsible party. He is wrong about almost everything, and he genuinely believes he is right. That's the thing about people like Gerald. They're not lying exactly. They're just living inside a story where they're always the one who understands best. Vivian took the stand on day 3. She was masterful. I mean that without irony. She was genuinely, technically masterful. She spoke about Daniel with specific, loving detail that the courtroom responded to. She described the last time she saw him, 3 weeks before he died, and the tears that came were real enough that their origin didn't matter. She described her grandchildren with warmth that was also real. Whatever else Vivian is, she does love Marin and Theo. She talked about wanting to give them continuity, stability, a connection to their father's family, and legacy. And then she described me, gently, carefully, as a wonderful woman simply overwhelmed by circumstances she hadn't anticipated. A mother doing her best in an impossible situation who needed, and here was the elegant move, who needed support, not judgment. She positioned the custody petition as an act of help. I watched 3 jurors. There were no jurors. I keep thinking of them as jurors. I mean, observers in the gallery. I watched people in that room shift slightly toward her. I felt it happen. I understood exactly what she was doing, and I could not stop it with my face or my posture or any of the tools I had. I just had to sit there and let it happen and trust Marcus. Marcus cross-examined her for 47 minutes. He was quiet about it. No theatrics, no raised voice, no dramatic reveals. He just asked her to confirm dates. When did she first contact the private investigator? Could she confirm the date? Could she look at Exhibit 14 and confirm that the date on that invoice was 11 days after her son's funeral? She confirmed it. Could she explain what specific incident in those 11 days had prompted that decision? She said she had concerns about the children's welfare. Could she identify a specific incident that generated those concerns? She could not identify a specific incident. Marcus nodded and moved on. He didn't editorialize. He didn't have to. The date was in the record. 11 days. The courtroom had done the math. Day 4. Marcus stood up and said he wished to introduce People's Exhibit 22, a handwritten journal authenticated by forensic documents examiner Carol Brecht as consistent in all verified characteristics with the known handwriting of Daniel Aaron Solberg. The opposing counsel objected. Judge Wren listened to 12 minutes of argument with her hands folded on the bench. Then she said, "Objection overruled. The journal is admitted." Gerald did not change expression. Vivian's jaw moved, just slightly, just for a moment, and then she had it back under control. Marcus opened the journal. He read 8 entries. He read them the way Daniel wrote them, without decoration, without pausing for effect. Just the words, in order, as Daniel had set them down. The courtroom was the quietest I have ever heard a room full of people be. And then Marcus reached the entry from 2 years before Daniel's death. I don't know why I keep feeling like I should write this down. Maybe because nothing I've said to my father has ever stuck without a record. If something happens to me, Renata needs to be able to prove what she is. Because my parents will not tell the truth about her if telling the truth costs them what they want. This is the moment. I know it's the moment because I have replayed it more times than I can count, and it still does the same thing to me every time. This specific sensation of being caught between devastation and relief, between grief and gratitude, between the loss of him and the impossible gift of him still being present in that room. He knew. He couldn't have known exactly, but he knew enough. He knew his father. He knew what love weaponized by a need for control looks like when it's aimed at someone. And he did the one thing he could think to do. He wrote it down, in his own hand, with dates, because he understood that his father would never believe anything that wasn't on record. If that hit you the way it hit me, if you're feeling something right now that you don't have a name for yet, hit that like button and subscribe, because what Daniel did matters beyond this story. What he did was an act of love so quiet and so specific that it took a courtroom to hear it. And you deserve to hear the rest of it. Marcus read one final entry, the last one Daniel wrote, 6 weeks before he died. Marin told me today that Mom is her best friend. I think that's the most important thing I'll write in here. Vivian Solberg looked down at the table in front of her. I watched it happen. I watched the performance run out of material. I watched the woman underneath it, the actual grieving mother who had lost her son and could not figure out how to carry that except by trying to control everything his death had left behind. I watched her surface for just a moment, just briefly, before she pulled herself back together. It cost me something to see that. Even then, even after everything. I looked away. Judge Patricia Wren took 4 days to issue her ruling. 4 days during which I went to work, picked up my children, made dinner, and did not reorganize a single cabinet. I'm not sure what that means exactly, but it felt like something. Like some part of my nervous system had decided to stand down from a posture it had been holding for 9 months and just wait. For the first time in a long time, I let myself wait without filling the waiting with motion. Marcus called on a Thursday afternoon. I was in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store, engine off, bag of apples and pasta and Theo's specific brand of yogurt that he will not eat any substitution of, in the back seat. My phone buzzed and I saw Marcus's name, and I sat up very straight, the way you do when your body knows before your brain does. "She ruled," he said. "Okay," I said. "Primary physical custody remains with you. Structured grandparent visitation. Supervised for the first year, then reviewed. The petition for custody transfer is denied in full." I didn't say anything for a moment. "Renata." I heard you, I said. It's over. I pressed my hand flat against the steering wheel and looked at the parking lot. The ordinary, gray, slushy Minnesota parking lot with the cart return and the woman loading a stroller into a minivan, and the pigeons near the entrance doing whatever pigeons do. And I felt relief move through me like something physical, like pressure releasing from a place I hadn't known was pressurized. Marcus kept talking. He told me about the written ruling, that Judge Wren had used specific language he wanted me to hear, and he read it to me slowly. The court finds no credible evidence that the respondent is an unfit, unavailable, or insufficiently capable parent. To the contrary, the contemporaneous written record provided by the deceased demonstrates a consistent, observed pattern of engaged and devoted parenting over a period of years. The petitioner's concerns, while understandable in the context of their grief, do not rise to the legal standard required to override the parental rights of a fit and present parent. The contemporaneous written record provided by the deceased. Daniel. Sitting in a courtroom he never entered, in a case he never knew would happen, speaking in the past tense on behalf of a future he didn't get to see. And being believed. I sat in that parking lot for a while after Marcus hung up. I didn't cry immediately. That's just not how I work, and I've stopped apologizing for it. I sat there and I let the quiet be quiet. The apples were in the back. Theo's yogurt was in the back. The pigeons were still doing their thing by the entrance. Then I called Cole. He picked up on the second ring and I said, "We won." And I heard him make a sound that wasn't a word, just this exhale, this complete release of something he'd been holding. And then I heard him crying. And that's when I finally started too. Both of us on the phone, not saying anything useful, just breathing together across the distance between his school parking lot and my grocery store parking lot on a Thursday in March. "He showed up," Cole said, when he could make words again. "Even now, he still showed up for you." "Yeah," I said. "He did." The consequences for Gerald and Vivian didn't come from anything I did. I want to be clear about that because it matters to me. I didn't pursue them. I didn't talk to people. I didn't do anything except live my life and let the record be the record. What happened was that the ruling became public. Family court documents in Minnesota are generally sealed when minors are involved, but the evidentiary components, including the authentication of the journal and the findings regarding Pollard's declaration, those made it into the legal record in ways that people in Gerald's professional circle eventually became aware of. Marcus told me about 6 weeks after the ruling that there had been quiet conversations in the commercial real estate community about Gerald's judgment. A man who, 11 days after burying his son, authorized a private investigator to build a file on his daughter-in-law. A man whose key witness had fabricated the dates of conversations with a dead man. These things have a way of finding the rooms they need to find. I heard about it from my friend Diane, who works adjacent to that world and still calls me every few weeks. She said it carefully, the way you say something you're not sure the other person wants to hear. People are talking about what Gerald did, not kindly. "Okay," I said. Does that feel good? To know that?" I thought about it honestly. "It feels like information," I said. "It doesn't feel like what I thought it would feel like." She laughed a little. "What did you think it would feel like?" "I don't know. Bigger, maybe." The truth is that by the time the consequences arrived for Gerald and Vivian, I had already moved past the place where their consequences were what I needed. I had needed the ruling. I had needed the judge's words in writing. I had needed Daniel's words read aloud in a room where his parents had to listen. Those things had already happened. What came after was just the world catching up to what the record had already established. Vivian called me 7 weeks after the ruling. I almost didn't pick up. I was standing at the kitchen sink washing the breakfast dishes, the kids already at school, and I looked at her name on my phone for a long time before I answered. She didn't apologize. I want to be honest about that. She didn't use the word sorry, not once. What she said was that she hoped we could find a way to be in the children's lives together, for Marin and Theo's sake. That she knew things had become, and here she paused for a long time, complicated. That she missed her grandchildren. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I said, "The visitation schedule Marcus and your attorney agreed on starts the second Saturday of next month. I'll have the kids ready at 10. I'd appreciate it if you could have them back by 5. A pause. "That's all you want to say?" "That's all I have to say right now, Vivian." Another pause. "All right," she said, and then, very quietly, in a voice that sounded like it came from somewhere further down than her usual register, "He loved you very much, you know, Daniel. I know I haven't. I know I didn't always." She stopped. "He loved you very much." "I know," I said. "I've read the evidence." I don't know if that was the right thing to say. I'm not sure there was a right thing. But it was the true thing, and I have made a decision, slowly, imperfectly, still in progress, to say the true thing even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. Gerald has not called. I don't expect him to. I think Gerald will need a very long time to find his way to a version of events in which he was wrong, and I'm not going to wait for it. Some reconciliations don't happen. Some people return and some people don't. And the ones who don't have to be accepted without bitterness, because bitterness is a thing you carry, and I've already been carrying enough. About a month after the ruling, I sat down and wrote a letter. Not to Gerald or Vivian, to Daniel. I know how that sounds. I know he can't read it. I wrote it anyway, because I had things that needed to be said out loud, even if out loud just meant onto paper. And because I am my mother's daughter, and she taught me that love looks like showing up, even when the other person can't see you do it. I told him what the journal had done. I told him about the courtroom and Marcus reading his words, and the way the room went quiet. I told him that Marin has started asking questions about him that are getting more specific and more complicated, and that I'm answering them as honestly as I can, and that she has his way of going very still when she's listening to something important. I told him Theo calls a cardinal in the backyard the red bird that visits, and has decided it is Daniel, and that I've decided not to correct this. I told him that I had found, in the process of fighting for our children, something I hadn't expected to find, which was evidence that I had been seen, fully, by him specifically, and that being seen like that, even after the fact, even in a courtroom, even through the voice of someone reading his handwriting aloud, it had changed something in me. It had made a small opening in the place where I keep the part of me that doesn't ask for help. I'm working on that part. Cole was there when I read it to him, because I'd written it and then needed to say it to an actual living person to know it was real. He sat across the kitchen table and listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is a skill he has always had and which I have never sufficiently thanked him for. When I finished, he said, "You're different, you know." "Different how?" He thought about it. "You let me make the coffee tonight without telling me I was doing it wrong." I laughed. Actually laughed, fully, for the first time in, I don't know how long. "I was thinking it," I said. "I know you were thinking it, but you didn't say it." He smiled at me across the table. "That's new." It's a Tuesday morning now. Ordinary in all the ways that matter. I'm in the kitchen at 6:47, packing 2 school lunches. The crusts off Marin's sandwich, the crusts on Theo's, 2 different kinds of fruit because they disagree about grapes. And the light is coming in at that particular low winter angle that makes everything in this kitchen look like it's been lit on purpose. Marin is at the table explaining something complicated about her friend's situation at school. Theo is upstairs and needs to be called at least 3 times. This is always true. I think it will be true when he's 17. I have not touched Daniel's side of the closet. I'm still sleeping on my side of the bed. I've decided not to rush either of those things. I've decided more broadly to stop treating my own grief like a problem that needs to be managed on a deadline. It's not a case file. It doesn't have a resolution date. The journal is in the desk drawer. I've read most of it now, slowly, a few entries at a time, on nights when the kids are asleep and the house is quiet, and I'm ready. There are still a few pages I haven't gotten to. I'll get there. What I know, standing in this kitchen on a Tuesday at 6:47, is this. The people who truly see us are the ones who write it down when no one is watching, who keep the record not for an audience but for the truth of it, who know, maybe, that love is most itself when it's practiced in private, when it has no reason to perform. Daniel knew who I was, not who he hoped I'd become, not who he needed me to be for his family's picture of what a Solberg household looked like. Who I actually was, on the ordinary days, the hard days, the days I got it wrong, and the days I got it right. He kept that knowledge carefully, and he left it somewhere I could find it. I am Renata Solberg. I'm 34 years old, and I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it. Has someone ever quietly protected you, left something behind, said something to the right person, wrote something down, in a way you only fully understood long after they did it? Someone who saw you clearly and acted on what they saw, without telling you, without needing credit for it. If that's happened to you, I want to hear about it. Leave it in the comments. I read every single one, and I mean that. This community is the reason I finally felt ready to tell this story out loud. If this stayed with you, if any part of Marin's recorder solo or Cole's pen behind his ear or Daniel's handwriting on a courtroom morning meant something to you, hit like, subscribe so you're here for the next one, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that being seen, really seen, is not too much to ask for. It never was.